It's very complicated. I think that's one of the reasons why we're working to have TikTok not have the People's Communists of China own TikTok, because it is a popular form of communication for young people, and for a lot of people. It's not just young people. A lot of seasoned people, like the president's campaign, are using it because it's a form of communication. But that's why the People's Republic of China wants control of it. If this bill passes, and they don't disinvest from TikTok, then I think none of us are going to.
This is the big fight looming right now, and it's not just about TikTok. It's exposed, I think, a very interesting divide in the right, with the more libertarian leaning people on the right and the more Republican leaning people on the right. Welcome back to the program. That was Debbie Dingle talking about this bill, this, I guess, for the lack of a better way to put it, the TikTok bill. Dana Loesch with you, bottom of this third hour. And my next guest, I like the way that he explained this, because it isn't really an issue of free speech. Because as Brendan Carr, who is a member of the FCC, commissioner on the FCC, he used to be general counsel as well for FCC, he explained, espionage is not a protected form of speech. Illicit conduct is not a protected form of expression. And it's not looking at what people are saying or TikTok speech. It's the relationship between TikTok and ByteDance, which is a CCP-owned thing. We've talked to Stephen Yates. We've explored ByteDance. We talked about how businesses work in China, and you have to have CCP members involved. That's a huge issue. And we have documented concrete evidence showing that there's some pretty shady practices that China's been involved in on the part of ByteDance with TikTok. Brendan Carr joins us now via Skype, and he is a commissioner on the FCC, previously general counsel. And he had a great thread about this that I'm going to make sure to include on Substack for our subscribers. Brendan, always so good to see you. Well, talk a little bit about that, because it isn't really, when you break it down, it's not a fight about free speech. It is about their illicit behavior.
Yeah, you got it exactly right, Dana. Thanks so much for having me on. This is very clear. The Supreme Court draws a line between government actions based on the content of speech, which is presumptively unconstitutional, and actions based on illicit conduct. So it's a content-conduct distinction. And here, the government isn't acting because of people's posts on TikTok. They're acting because TikTok has been caught repeatedly engaging in conduct that is itself espionage. So, for instance, TikTok said for years, don't worry, no U.S. user data is going back to China. It doesn't even exist there, they said. But then a blockbuster report came out based on leaked materials that showed everything is seen inside China. And that is highly sensitive information. That's search and browsing history, keystroke patterns, biometrics, location information. And so that's the reason for the government to be acting. It's the conduct, not the content. And this bill is really smart. First of all, it's very narrow, very targeted, and it would actually just require TikTok to break up with the CCP, and then people that love TikTok, I'm not one of them, but people that love it can continue to use it.
And so that's what it comes down to, doing business with ByteDance. So the offer is essentially, if you break up with ByteDance, or if ByteDance sells it because it's a subsidiary, that's their parent company, then there's no issue. But if they don't, then that's what could incur the ban, correct?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And some people have argued, is TikTok really any that different than other big tech social media companies? And it is, definitively so. I mean, look, I've not spared any criticism for U.S. big tech companies that I think engage in too much censorship. But what they do is fundamentally different than TikTok. TikTok has, in the ByteDance leadership level, a CCP cell embedded. ByteDance personnel have used illicit access to TikTok to surveil Americans. There's been independent analysis that's looked at the TikTok source code and finds that it pulls an excessive and alarming amount of data. And look, TikTok said, all right, you caught us red-handed. We're going to stop sending this data back to China. Don't worry about it anymore. Then a Wall Street Journal report came out and showed, lo and behold, personnel in Beijing are still getting access. Why? It's not because the TikTok people are bad people. It's because they're beholden to the CCP. So whatever you want to do to big tech, whatever you want to do about privacy and data flow laws, have at it. But until TikTok breaks up with the CCP, none of that other stuff is going to matter.
We're talking with Brendan Carr with the FCC. There have been some concerns raised by people like Congressman Thomas Massie. And he says he was a little bit worried, from what I gather, about some of the vagary for the lack of a better way to put it, in the bill. Like, it could have been tightened up. It could have been maybe more specificity, because he's concerned about the executive authority to go further than just, CCP entities that have apps, but to ban, maybe all websites. He was cautious over the term foreign adversary not being defined. And, I tend to, give that a little weight, especially in an era where, somebody who disagrees with you on healthcare can be considered a terrorist. So what do you say to those concerns? And is that something that can be fixed in some amendment process?
Yeah, Rep. Massey's been so good on so many of these issues of individual liberty, but this bill is actually slightly different than that. There were other TikTok bills that I think a lot of people on the right had a lot of concerns that were too sweeping, but this particular one goes at TikTok and only other applications that clear 4 separate hurdles. So one, the bill has no authority to go for any individual user. That's off the table, unlike other bills. 2, you have to be controlled by a foreign adversary, and that's defined by Congress already as only 4 entities. So it's China, North Korea, Iran, and Russia. And then you have to go through an additional process, including a public report on the concrete national security threat. Again, it's not enough that you're even controlled by a foreign adversary. It has to be also a national security threat. Congress is involved with process. So there's 4 or 5 hoops you have to go to that make sure that this is very, very targeted, and it corrects course from some overbreadth that we saw maybe in other TikTok bills. So I appreciate the concern, but that's why I think this bill is so smart, because it is so narrow.
Does it make it a little difficult in that we have the current president who uses TikTok, and then the former president just reversed his stance the other day on TikTok, on his social media platform, former President Trump, saying that he found Facebook was a lot worse, which I thought was a little weird, because for all the criticism legitimately of, Meta, they at least haven't, to my knowledge, bowed to the CCP in China. So that Facebook isn't in China. China doesn't allow Facebook there. They have their own version. But to have that stance, to have the former president reverse his position against TikTok, how much is that going to change things as it relates to policing their conduct through ByteDance?
Yeah, look, President Trump is right that we also need to take a look at, regular social media companies like Facebook. I've long advocated for Section 230 reform. I think you and I have been close on that issue, but maybe I go too far from where you want to be on that issue. But we do need to rein in those big tech companies. But again, it starts with dealing with the national security threat. And President Trump was out front on this. In 2020, he identified TikTok as a real threat, tried to take action. And so it's important that we step back with this. As to President Biden, it's true his campaign is on TikTok. And that's why partly I think it's so important that we get this bill passed, because then if they want to, they can stay there, but they can do it in a way that no longer presents the same national security threat as being on there right now while it's beholden to the CCP.
Yeah, and that makes, had that security. It freaks me out, honestly, that a member of government would have a personal device, or any member of the administration would have that on their personal device, knowing what we know about it. Do you have an indication? I mean, does it look like that sale could happen? I know China's been, rattling the sabers about it, making a lot of noise about, I think it's ironic, the First Amendment, which they don't have in China. But is there an indication that they might actually agree to sell, to decouple, so that they don't have to lose the American audience?
Yeah, it's unclear, but right now there's a lot of, at least TikTok claims, a lot of independent investors that are invested in ByteDance. And that's right. If they're really calling the shots, then presumably they're going to want to turn a profit by complying with the sale provision, rather than having the app be banned entirely from the U.S. And there's been a lot of people that have put their hand up. I thought Rumble recently today, I saw put their hand up as being interested. Kevin O'Leary from Shark Tank put his hand up. So it could be interesting to see where it goes. And it doesn't even have to be a U.S. company. It just has to be an entity, again, that doesn't trigger those 4 or 5 hurdles, which is controlled by a foreign adversary, be a national security threat in addition. And so there's a lot of sort of process that would happen at that point too.
We're talking to FCC Commissioner Brendan Carr about the big TikTok fight. Is there any truth to the speculation that, I know that there were some exceptions that were cited? I mean, like the Amazon. Some people were suggesting that maybe Amazon asked for a carve out. I mean, is there any truth to the rumors?
No, not at all. There's some confusion around that too. There's 2 different pieces of the bill. So the one piece of the bill that we were just talking about, which is how do you get defined as a covered application for purposes of the ban? Those are those 4 or 5 hoops you have to go through. The U.S. part of that, in terms of this website language, is an additional limiter as well. So it's making sure that it doesn't cover any of those companies. So I think there's some just confusion about the provisions. Of course, if TikTok chooses not to divest and to take the ban option, then there's a part of the law that says, Google and Apple can't continue to allow TikTok to operate through back doors. And so that's the only part that comes in. But again, that portion of the bill that deals with Google, Apple, or similar companies is not covered by the provision that gives the government power to ban. And so I just think there is some confusion about the interplay between what we call the substantive ban authority and just this back end stuff that says if they go the non-divestment route, of course, a U.S. company can't enable them to keep doing business here. But that's different than banning that U.S. company.
Yeah, it is. And I think when I see some of the arguments out there saying, oh, well, I don't want the government telling me what app to have. Well, that's, again, I go back to that illicit conduct. I was inclined to not totally agree with you on this. But I love the way that I like how you did explain that. There's a lot of nuance there because there is a difference between the conduct that a company is engaging in and then, actually, banning speech and et cetera, et cetera. So we'll see how this plays out, but it does open a brave new world because I feel like this is just like one of many hurdles we're going to have to get over as tech becomes more and more integrated in society, even more so now with AI and everything else. Any final observation about this bill you want to share?
No, all good points. Just yesterday, the Wall Street Journal editorial board came out in favor, which I think is a really good indicator for whatever people think about the Wall Street Journal editorial board, that it doesn't sweep too broadly into U.S. companies. I think if it did, you wouldn't have seen, that outlet come out with that position. So I think it's just further evidence that the legislature have done a smart job of just zeroing in on things that are demonstrated, controlled by foreign adversaries, so that it protects our individual liberties as well. It's a smart path forward.
Yeah, well, we'll see how this performs, but I mean, it is a very good point, and nobody likes. I wish we could extend from ByteDance and look at like Tencent and look at some of the other stuff, because the gaming platforms, it's like a whole other thing with all of the CCP companies. Actually, one last quick thing for you. Kellyanne Conway was saying, why start with this? She was kind of defending, I think, the former president's position on it. She was saying, why not start with fentanyl, et cetera, or the persecution of Uyghurs, the vulnerability of Taiwan? Why are you starting with TikTok? That was her question in an interview that she gave earlier. What is your thought on that?
Yeah, I'd say we're not starting with it. We're not starting with it here. We've taken action on Huawei, ZTE, China Mobile, China Telecom, and President Trump was the one in 2020 that said, hey, there's a problem with TikTok. And he was right. And so that's why I think it's important that we, follow through on this action. Again, it's not a first one. TikTok is just the next one in a string of entities tied to the CCP that we're taking action on.
Yeah, I think we can multitasking. I mean,
yes.
I think we're capable of doing that. Brendan Carr with the FCC, and I appreciate. I have to double check. I still have my pass. My one.
You haven't used it yet.
I haven't used it yet.
FCC jail.
Yes, that's right. So just, we always like to have that record when we have you on, sir. We always like to have a record. Brendan Carr with the FCC. Thank you so much. Appreciate your time and your explanation on this. Thank you.
Good to see you. Thanks so much.
You too.